But as you now can see, probably, as you now can see, when I look on the task overview, we see this entity type, which is default in all cases, and we have an entity identifier, which in the first case is NURL, and here this is an hash. So what this entity type is basically it allows you to validate data, but it also allows you to set and manipulate the entity identifier. So if you, for example, are processing orders, you can create an entity type that's called orders, and you can put the order ID in here. If you're processing customers, you could create an entity type that's customers, and you could put the customer email address in here. And then it's easier to find tasks that belong to a certain piece of data. So when we look at our data, so we'll open one of the tasks, and then we'll go to the entity data. What we can say, for example, we want to show the ID of the user and the email address of the user in the task overview. So if we want to do this, we have to go to clients, to entity types. We have to create a new one. So we can call this something like example user. Then down here, we can define a schema, and the schema can be used to validate the data. In a lot of cases, people are not using this because it's quite complex, but if you really want to do it, you can do so. And then you can validate the data. And if it doesn't match the schema, then the task will be skipped. But also down here, you see the identifier path. And this identifier path allows you to manipulate this entity identifier we saw in the task overview. So what we can do here, we can add a new field, and then you have to pass the path to the field on the object. So in this case, if we look at our task, we see that we have an object, and on the root we have the ID field, and on the root we have the email field. So this one is quite easy. We can just do ID in here. We can add another field like so, email. Now I can go ahead and save this. I will go back to the transformer where I'm splitting up the users. So this is the transformer I created to split up the full list of users to separate tasks. And here I will set the entity type I just created. So it will be example user. And now when I save this and I run the incoming again, so I think it's this one, and we go to the task overview, we can now see that we have 10 new tasks with the new entity type I created. And in the entity identifier, we can see the user ID, but also the email address. And now I can look specifically for a certain user. So for example, I can look for this Carly Dag. So when I just look for this Carly, like so, I will only get the tasks that belong to this user. So it's easier for me to locate certain pieces of data within the integration. So you always want to use the entity identifier. Because remember, when you don't do it, you get this default entity identifier, and then you get this hash. And this hash doesn't really say anything. So if I'm a customer and I'm looking, why is this order not migrated? And I see this hash, that doesn't really make sense for me. But if I see an email address or I see an order ID, then it's really easier for me to make sense of it, out of it.